In this video, I'll give examples of 4 films by famous British directors who had their work censored, discredited or banned, and explain why. Then you can decide if you agree with those reasons or not. Let's get into it. First up is one of the most famous films and filmmakers of all time, and that's The Great Dictator by Charlie Chaplin. The Great Dictator is about a Jewish barber who's mistaken for a fascist dictator. The film uses satire to criticise dictatorships and anti-Semitism.
15 cents, please.
Charlie Chaplin announced he was going to make an anti-fascism and particularly anti-Hitler satire in 1938. British diplomats asked him not to do this because they wanted to avoid upsetting Hitler, but Chaplin thought it was an important message. Chaplin went ahead and made the film, and it was finished in 1940. By that point, Germany had invaded Poland, and we were officially at war with Germany. However, the British Board of Film still wouldn't grant a screening certificate, arguing that it might damage foreign relations. You would have thought it might have been a little bit late for that. Funnily enough, the government actually considered Charlie Chaplin to be politically unpredictable, and they didn't want to shine a spotlight on him.
Yes, dictator of the world. We'll start with the invasion of Austerlitz.
This finally changed when Winston Churchill came into power and after the Blitz, where Germany had bombed the UK for 57 consecutive nights. By this point, our government were happy to share anti-Hitler imagery, and it was finally granted a certificate of release. The Great Dictator was a massive success, and it helped boost morale at a particularly difficult time in our history. So it achieved exactly the opposite of what the government thought it would. The film is still seen as a classic today, with the famous speech at the end of the film still being watched by millions of people every year.
Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now let us fight to fulfill that promise. Let us fight to free the world, to do away with national barriers, to do away with greed, with hate and intolerance. Let us fight for a world of reason, a world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Soldiers, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
The next 3 films I'm going to talk about are all by the same person, and that's one of Britain's most iconic and internationally respected filmmakers, Ken Loach. Ken Loach spent his career making films within the social realism genre, and he's probably most famous for the cult classic Kes.
Get down! I'll be your red hook in a minute!
Since the beginning of his career, Ken Loach's films have hit a nerve. They're politically sharp, meaning politicians and broadcasters have repeatedly tried to censor his work. He even had one documentary pulled the night before it was supposed to air on the BBC. Essentially, as well as being openly critical of the government over the years, his work has forced the country to confront the issues it didn't want to see: homelessness, poverty, and varying kinds of state violence. Ken Loach started directing for television in the 1960s, but it was his drama, Cathy Come Home, that made him a household name. Nobody expected that film to have the impact that it did. Cathy Come Home is a drama set in London about a young couple, Cathy and Reg, and their 2 children. Reg works hard to provide for his family, but after a car crash, he's left unable to work, and this leads to them beginning to struggle financially. They move from one unstable housing situation to another before becoming homeless, and this leads to social services taking their children from them. The final scene deeply shocked the British public, pulling in an audience of 12 million. This sparked national debate, and the homeless charity Shelter was founded off the back of Cathy Come Home, and Shelter is still the biggest homeless charity in the country today. Obviously, Cathy Come Home wasn't banned, but its impact was a surprise to everybody. There was even debate in the House of Commons, and this led to some politicians putting pressure onto BBC executives, who then stated, in hindsight, Cathy Come Home was too political. The BBC was pressured not to commission any other shows like this anytime soon. However, this pressure was applied privately, meaning the censorship of shows like this was unofficial. 20 years later, and Ken Loach was still ruffling feathers. During the miners' strikes, Ken Loach directed a documentary that featured songs and poetry from mining communities. It also featured people sharing what pit closures would mean to them and their families, and how it would impact them.
Which side are you on?
The documentary was titled, Which Side Are You On? The documentary was pulled the night before it was supposed to air on BBC One, labelled Dangerous, although it was literally just songs, poetry and conversation. It was feared if people saw the genuine concerns and humanity of the miners, then the general public might sympathise with them the same way they did with homeless people after Cathy Come Home aired.
We look at our colliery where there's 1,100 men employed. Once that colliery closes, there's whole communities die.
The documentary didn't air for another 12 months once the strikes were over, and it was pushed to BBC Two, meaning it had a much smaller audience and impact. And Ken Loach didn't stop there. Another 30 years after this, in 2016, he wrote and directed feature film I, Daniel Blake, which was similar to Cathy Come Home in the sense it was about failures of the government and the welfare system at the time. The film follows Daniel Blake, a widowed joiner from Newcastle who suffers a serious heart attack and is declared unfit to work by his doctor. However, the welfare system deems him fit to work after a work capability assessment, cutting off his benefits unless he actively seeks work he's medically unfit to do.
I don't believe it.
He struggles to apply for jobs, feeling trapped in a system where he's treated as a case number rather than a person. Daniel Blake appeals the decision made by the work capability team, but as stress and poverty worsen his health, he dies before his hearing. The film won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, which is probably the most prestigious film festival in the world, and was praised for its realism. The Conservative government at the time tried to state the film was just a story and not true to life. Loach disagreed with this, and it led to him debating a Conservative politician on the news.
It doesn't really reflect the political reality that people experience.
This system is imposed with conscious cruelty. We heard so many stories. A man has had a heart attack. He's assessed for whether by the state. He has a heart attack in the course of the assessment and is then sanctioned because he doesn't complete it. And I'll tell you why we know it, because most people, if they can appeal against their assessment that they're fit for work when they're plainly ill, they will win the appeal.
Ken Loach helped educate and inspire millions and made a point of being a voice for the working and middle class. However, he's recently retired. So are the government and broadcasters right to censor some of these films, or are they more concerned with controlling public perception than they are sharing the truth? What do you think?